Alrighty, so the best way to really show you what LFS is and to help you understand what we do here in our faculty is to really dive into a concept with a very hands-on approach. This is something that we try and do in all of our classes, and quite frankly, it makes our learning experience far more impactful and real because we're able to actually apply what we're learning outside of the classroom. So we study this extensively in many of our courses from a variety of different perspectives, which is something that really allows us to develop these holistic ideas of knowledge and learning. So behind the scenes of global agribusiness. What is global agribusiness? If we break this down and we consider global, agri, and business, global can be applied to worldwide. It's a very general idea that encompasses everything that happens on our planet. If we consider agriculture, that relates to food markets and production and the way our food systems interact with our planet, and business more explicitly relates to sales and business operations. So global agribusiness essentially is worldwide agricultural sales. This kind of leads to a general theme that we see in a lot of our supermarkets. Global agribusiness drives superfoods and things that become trendy and really desirable. So generally speaking, the market price of what we call superfoods are increased because of health marketing, and there may not necessarily be any scientifically based proof to suggest that these foods are in fact superfoods, but simply because of global agribusiness and market trends, they suddenly become very popular and high in demand. And the history of global agribusiness, um, a little bit of context here. So American fruit companies offered in Latin American money and job prospects, and money for roads and fertilizers can be part of this whole system. And as I mentioned previously, as demand grows, there often results in a greater business and higher prices for items like these. And specifically with bananas, the demand grew so fast for them in America that wages remained the same. They remained pretty low for laborers in Latin America. However, the price of the fruit and the amount of people that wanted the fruit continued to increase. Jacob Arbenz ran for president in Guatemala and campaigned for fair wages and charging fair taxes. However, US President Dwight Eisenhower allotted $3 million to drive Arbenz out of power. So in doing so, that resulted in civil war within Guatemala, and this chaos kept Chiquita in control. And Chiquita is one of the main banana exporters down in Guatemala. And you could imagine the conflict that arose between the states and Guatemala as a result of this. This conflict between Guatemala and the United States begged the question of whether the cost of bananas exceeded the worth of human rights. So this argument kind of comes from whether or not short-term workers could be hired so that companies don't have to pay health benefits and insurance and other things that might increase the overall cost of running their businesses. And employees would live on plantations without adequate water or electricity at the cost of their own health because the business was not interested in providing them with fair wages and paying more. Conversations like this also happen in Canada, surprisingly, and not something that we actively consider because as a developed country, we don't necessarily think about the fact that we might be unfairly treating employees, paying them unfair wages and not providing them with the care that they need. But this is very much an issue that happens all across the world. It's something to really pay attention to. It's important, and it's not something that just happens in developing nations around the world. And COVID has even peeled back the layers and helped us realize that there are many things that we just accept and we don't necessarily know about, and whether that is because we are naive and have more to learn about, or simply that we're just not aware. There's a responsibility that we have to take that action and actually learn about what we are doing and how we might be contributing to issues like this. So then this is where we begin to see that shift from human rights being valued less than the cost of bananas, but this idea that if workers were to leave work early, that meant they would have to leave their homes. If workers had 14-hour days in the heat, they would still be making less than minimum wage despite these changing conditions. So it's very important to acknowledge how individual organizations have a responsibility to care for their employees despite what it might cost them. and their product. Perfect. So then, generally speaking, employees would continue to work in relatively health-threatening environments. So whether that was due to environmental factors such as heat, extreme weather conditions, or more direct ones such as tropical diseases or agrochemicals, chemicals would be deemed hazardous by the World Health Organization, and some could very well be toxic and potentially carcinogenic. And working in environments like that is not favorable to human health and truly isn't favorable to the environment either. And then this could also relate to heat, exhaustion, and general fatigue resulting from extreme labor and working in these harsh environments. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a trickle effect here. It begins with human rights, and then you start to consider health, and then you begin to consider the effects of actions like this on the environment. Some examples relating to banana plantations. Rainforests are often slashed and burned for plantains, and then they are abandoned. And at that point, it takes hundreds and hundreds of years for them to regenerate their previous ecosystems, if they even have any capacity to do that at all. Plantations also disrupt biodiversity and communities within these areas that have been slashed and burned. Soil erosion due to the removal of topsoil and the repeated use of soil without replenishment, the addition of nutrients, and other factors like this often result in these pieces of land being unusable after. And soil is less fertile after because of nutrient depletion. This constant growth and a lack of time for the environment to naturally restore itself often results in less nutritious products, but also a less fertile environment, preventing use down the line. All right, so next we've got a little activity for you. Add on the diagram here, using the annotation feature, where you think Canada might fall under the effects of COVID-19 in Canadian farmers here. So do you think we're more on a poor quality or excellent quality, or worse on the global scale and better on the global scale? Okay, so I can see one annotation here. I'll just repeat the question. Where do you think Canadian agribusiness falls under workplace hazards? Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for contributing, Benita. That's great. So yeah, generally speaking, overall, we are not too horrible here in Canada, but comparably, we definitely have a lot more infrastructure and regulations when it comes to workplace safety and working. However, all at the same time, there are plenty of areas for improvement and lots of things that we could do to make our workplace environment safer for our workers, both whether they be in office settings or out in the field working in agriculture directly. COVID-19, though, has had a relatively significant impact on global agribusinesses and has specifically had a significant impact on migrant workers. These are just some of the many news articles that are talking about the need for migrant workers and the role that they play in global agribusiness. Some of these headlines here talking about how they're essential but expendable, and how our responsibilities have not been upheld with migrant workers and supporting them with fair wages and fair living conditions. Another titled here, Exploitation, Abuse, Health Hazards Rise for Migrant Workers During COVID-19. And so much of this has to do with the lack of infrastructure from where they come from, but also a failure to uphold our own responsibilities in developed nations. So again, we've got another activity here, workplace hazards in Canada. So based off those few articles and what we just briefly discussed there, where do you think Canada then maybe falls? That's great, awesome, thank you. So yeah, generally speaking, we fall kind of towards the better end on the global scale and better quality in terms of workplace hazards, or lack thereof, I guess, is more appropriate. So there's certainly a lot of work that needs to be done around the world, and by no means is Canada excluded from that, but overall, we are doing a pretty good job of making sure we're providing our employees with safe environments, fair wages, and things like that. And referencing the migrant workers once again, there's still lots that we need to do, and we recognize their value, but we certainly have more work to do in terms of supporting them and actually ensuring that they are treated fairly and they have accessible to the care that they need while they are here working for us. In terms of workplace hazards, these are just a few incidences reported in the local news here. A blueberry farm didn't fully report injured workers. We've also have an example of a man being charged with negligence, fish farm workers in accidents on Vancouver Island and things like this. So these aren't things that we can ignore because they do happen and they're a very big part of workplace operations on a day-to-day basis. So it's really important to make sure that we're giving them the attention they deserve, but also taking the time to understand why these things happen and how they are closely linked to global agribusiness. So once again, we have another activity here. So this one is specifically about mental health in Canadian farmers. So where do you think Canadian agribusiness falls under workplace mental health standards? And do you think in comparison, we are doing a good job of ensuring our employees have access to resources they need? Okay, interesting. Yeah, so generally speaking, this does vary significantly, and I think a big part of it too depends on whereabouts you may be in Canada, what your position is, the type of company you're working for, and things like that. There's a lot of variability, which I think is probably one of the bigger faults of the system. There's a lack of regulation when it comes to things like this. Some articles in the news reference how individuals, Canadian farmers, thought they might die or they might not survive long enough to sustain themselves, their families. They opened up about their significant struggles with mental health and the lack of support within the farming industry and agribusiness as a whole. So a lot of these issues arise from the isolation that results from working on farms and working in poor conditions. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to how we can make these resources accessible for individuals and how to make sure that agribusiness actually has the ability to provide these resources to individuals. So what exactly is agribusiness doing in Canada? So agriculture and AgriFood Canada programs have not only helped farmers profit in the long term in Canadian and international markets, even during severe weather and disease, but we've also found ways to research and fight diseases and improve overall crop value, making sure our food is healthy and safe. We've invested lots of money and resources into science and research and work, trying to find sustainable farming practices in Canada and making sure that we can actually sustain ourselves long enough to develop new and innovative strategies that will help us build our agribusiness. So as much as there is a more complex detrimental side to this, there's also a very productive and forward thinking side. So I think a really big part of this is trying to find that balance between how do we support what we currently have and make sure that we're paying attention to that and allocating the necessary resources to the people who actually run global agribusiness, but then also how do we find ways to ensure that we are being strategic in our environmental initiatives and making sure that we are actually producing foods that we can feed to people. Awesome. So this brings us to the point in our workshop where we're just going to shift our lens a little bit here and look back at LFS a little bit more. I'm just going to take a moment to highlight Will Valley, one of our faculty members here in LFS. Will Valley is an associate professor of teaching in our faculty, and he specifically teaches courses in the LFS course series. So this includes LFS 100, LFS 250, and LFS 350. LFS 100 is an introductory course to landed food systems and ways of studying and being strategic in your career planning and development, and your degree as well. It's a really great introductory course for first year students. Then we have LFS 250 and LFS 350, which focus a little bit more on the systems within LFS and how these apply to different global food systems, different environmental initiatives. And it's really great. These two courses are really great at connecting what we study to the real world. And they really help you understand the profound effects of what we are learning on our environment, on our food systems, on animal welfare, and things like that. Very, very valuable course series. So they involve a lot of critical thinking and often focus on very difficult conversations and topics, including racism, sexism, and inequalities, both in the local and global food systems. And then next, we just want to shine a light on one of our alumni. Jenny Liu graduated from the Global Resources Systems program. Global Resource Systems is a very unique degree in the sense that you kind of get to create your own. You pick a region and a resource, and you focus your entire degree on studying this region and resource. It's very unique, it's very flexible, and as a part of your degree, you're actually required to go on exchange to the region that you choose to study, which is very, very special. I don't believe there's any other degree like it here at UBC. So one comment from Jenny is that she actually got this job because of her LFS background. She currently supports administration and finance, as well as works on community engagement projects that relate to Chinese Canadian history and heritage. She really appreciated the empathy that was discussed in LFS in many of her classes and the context of making change in our food systems while truly listening and hearing other people's stories.